welcome to the Bertha Nightlands room in CLC Hall. My name is Sophia Lee, and I am the board chair of Gender Justice League. Before we begin, I would like to first acknowledge that right now we are on stolen land of the Duwamish tribe. And while we fight for trans rights, we need to keep in mind that we must do so while honoring the land and the people both. We are here in response to the Women's Liberation Front, who are coming to Seattle Central Public Library to promote their message of transphobic hate, to argue against the rights of transgender people to live as their authentic selves. The Women's Liberation Front has a history of promoting hateful speech against the trans community. Trans women are women. Trans men are men. Non-binary people are valid. This is in line with what most feminist and human rights organizations follow, but these are the things that the Women's Liberation Front is arguing against. And that is why we're here, to show that the Women's Liberation Front, that we, the people of Seattle, won't stand for the hate that they're trying to bring. Our first speaker tonight is Toby Hillmeyer, a longtime fighter for transgender rights within our community. Toby is a local writer, a filmmaker, and the co-executive director of Gender Justice League. Toby Hillmeyer.
Thank you, everyone. So I want to give a little bit of context of what's going on here. I know many of you have been following this very closely, and some folks could benefit from hearing a little bit more about what exactly has been happening. I think there's some important context that we all need to have as a part of this conversation when we're looking at this event at the library. And that context is how the library has been handling trans issues over the past couple of years. That we have a situation pretty recently where a trans person was kicked out of the library for attempting to use the bathroom. And it took over a year for the library to be able to create a policy around trans people using bathrooms in the library. It still continues to be an issue where some of the bathrooms that are available have the stall doors really low, and the single stall bathrooms can be harder to access. Now there's a policy to make it a little bit easier for people to access the single stall bathrooms. But this is one piece of the story leading up to what's happening right now. Additionally, something that you might not have known is that just about 1 month ago, there was an incident at the Capitol Hill Library where a trans woman was followed into the bathroom and threatened with a knife. It's hard to say what specifically that specific incident was about, but nonetheless, this is contributing to an overall climate where trans people accessing library services is a significant issue. And it's going to be important that the library and the city take action to make it clear that trans people are welcome in the library and that services will not come at the cost of having to expose yourself to transphobia or risking that every time you go down there. And it is it's not enough to just point at a non-discrimination policy and say the words trans people are welcome when this is the environment that is going on and trans people are actively fearing harassment and discrimination when you want to go to the library. This often gets talked about, and you've probably seen it in the media being talked about as a First Amendment issue. And there is the issue about, like, does does the library, which is a part of the city, provide spaces to what kind of groups? But the bigger issue that we are pushing today is that even if speech is protected by the First Amendment, it does not need to be made welcome. The First Amendment does not protect anybody from having their speech criticized. And it is important that anytime we see hate, we have a strong vocal condemnation of that hate. That's what we're here to do today. You know, we see this anti-trans group that is holding an event in the library, and we see that they are holding events at libraries all across the US and Canada. And we can see what's happening in each of these other cities to get a sense of what their overall goals are. And one of the things that's really clear is that they are trying to provoke a reaction where they can claim that their First Amendment rights are being violated and then paint themselves as the victims. Part of that approach requires us to believe and buy into this false equivalency that says that the people who are criticizing our existence are at the same level as the people who are simply trying to exist. We cannot let this topic be discussed as a both sides issue. We need to be able to contextualize this inside the larger anti-trans organizing happening throughout this country. One of the things going on right now is that radical anti-trans organizations are pushing for a project they're calling Project Blips. And this is where they are attempting to put legislation into state legislatures all across the country to target trans people, to split our resources, to thin our response to the point where some of this might get through. And we're seeing some happening already. There's a set of bills going on in states all across the country that would prohibit trans teenagers from competing in school sports with the gender that they identify as. We've even seen one of those bills being introduced here in Washington. Even worse, we've seen bills introduced in half a dozen states and in South Dakota actually moving forward, which would make it a crime for a doctor to prescribe puberty blockers to teenagers. When they are forcing doctors to choose between providing scientifically medical care or jail time, that is way too far. And that is threatening our community, that's threatening our support structures, and specifically targeting our children. This is not okay. We are not going to take this without response. And we're pushing some of our own actions here in the state legislature. There is a bill that was introduced that would actually prohibit the use of trans panic as a legal defense when people commit assault or murder. We pushed to try and get this bill passed last year, and unfortunately, it did not pass last year And one of the reasons we were told why it was not prioritized is out of this idea that that kind of thing doesn't happen here in Washington. Unfortunately, in the year that has passed since then, we have an example that proves that wrong. Last year in Vancouver, there was a 17-year-old trans girl who was murdered. And as the case is moving forward, it's looking as if what happened is matching up to the narrative of trans panic. We are asking that the legislature, in Nikki's memory, rename this bill the Nikki Kuhnhausen Act and pass it through the legislature as soon as possible. When we look at what anti-trans hate is doing across the country, we can see that it is their aim to overwhelm us. And it is their aim to test for weak spots, to look for places around the country that might be more receptive to their anti-trans messaging. We see that happening when they introduce bills around sports, around healthcare. We see that with how they are responding to these events at libraries around the country. And it's important that whenever we see that, we must have a strong condemnation of anti-trans hate, wherever it is, and show that we will not be an easy target.
Thank you. Thank you, Toby. The Women's Liberation Front is a hate group, pure and simple. And when a hate group comes into town to attack the rights of trans women, it is a women's issue. The Seattle Women's Commission is a group who advises the mayor, the city council, and the city departments on issues that impact all women in Seattle. Our next speaker from the commission, from the Seattle Women's Commission, Idabel Fosse.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me? What a wonderful turnout. I want to say thank you to all the organizers of this event for putting it together and doing this important work. I'm here on behalf of the Seattle Women's Commission, and as Sophia said, it is our job to advise the city on issues of importance to women. And we're here to speak up against transphobia and to share our disappointment with the Seattle Public Library for hosting the Women's Liberation Club. Wolf aggressively advocates a sex as gender understanding of human identity that erases trans, intersex, and gender nonconforming people from what we imagine them to be as human. While we respect and understand the Seattle Public Library's commitment to intellectual freedom and freedom of speech, the Seattle Women's Commission stands firmly against transphobia and in solidarity with the Seattle LGBTQ Commission and the Seattle LGBT community. The Women's Commission is a welcoming space for all, and as such, is committed to working with and fighting for all women, trans people, and gender nonconforming folks. We reject hate and discrimination in all of its forms. In a public statement written by the advocates of the Northwest Network, of bi, trans, lesbian, and gay survivors of abuse, which is a Seattle-based, nationally reaching anti-violence organization. They say the following. Wolf's exclusionary language is a violent tool used to attempt to gain power over the trans community. The goal of their intentionally manipulative messaging is to convince the public that trans people perpetuate rather than suffer violence, and that their existence and empowerment are the source of that violence. We understand that dehumanizing and villainizing people are intentional and strategic precursors to committing violence against them. In working to ban trans, intersex, and gender nonconforming people legally and culturally from what the public understands as human, Wolf hopes to encourage our exclusion and thereby justify harm against us. In the face of this violence, we assert our community is irrefutable. It is an enduring fact. Our existence is ancient and guaranteed. And our authenticity is inspiring. By hosting Wolf, the library not only legitimizes their violent messaging, but also fails to send an important and powerful message that we will use this statement to communicate instead. The existence of trans, intersex, and gender nonconforming people is not debatable in this community. Our exclusion from the legal and institutional protections of this country will not be tolerated, and institutions dedicated to sowing hate, fear, and division are not welcome here. The Central Library's decision begs the question of who the library is for and deepens an already substantial trust deficit with the queer and trans communities. Our work at the Northwest Network is to support queer people who have experienced harm as they return to their bodies, their communities, their families, and to their places of security and autonomy. As members of trans, intersex, non-binary, and gender non-conforming communities, we want to say unequivocally that any model of liberation built on our eradication is simply another form of tyranny. We know that biology has been used to justify bigotry for hundreds of years in genocide, colonialism, and slavery. Science also shows us that human gender and sexual orientation are infinitely diverse, and that gender and gender identity are concepts. There is no such thing as a real man or woman. Those are merely constructs created by the patriarchy in order to create a system of power and control. Amen. It is this type of problematic messaging that leads to the murders of our transgender sisters, and transgender women are women. Again, I'd like to say thank you to the Northwest Network for their work and their amazing, strong words, and to all of the organizations and commissions that have come together to put together this event and the protest tonight. And I want to remind us all that we are here in the name of love and inclusivity, and we will always be stronger together against hate.
Thank you, Irabel of the Women's Commission. I want to remind everyone that we do have art making supplies back in back in the back of the room. So please utilize those and make these wonderful signs that everyone is like gonna hold up and like march onto the library with. Thank you. The Seattle Women's Commission is not alone in this fight with us against the Women's Liberation Front. Not only them, but we also have the LGBTQ Commission of the Seattle of the City of Seattle here with us to say a few words. And this is Annabelle.
Annabelle Jackson, she, her pronouns. I'm going to put a little asterisk on that introduction because if you look at the LGBTQ Commission site, you won't find my name up there because I'm still pending confirmation. So I'm not speaking on behalf of the Commission, but I am speaking a little about the reason I joined the Commission and the work that I hope to do there. The LGBTQ Commission, some really big words, right? Like, it sounds like I should know what I'm doing. I'm on that thing. I really don't. I have no idea. I didn't know I was going to be speaking here until about 30 minutes ago. So, why am I? Because I'm concerned about what happens tomorrow. We have a lot of great work that's happening today, a lot of great work that's going to happen tonight. And there's going to be more marches and more protests because all this work didn't start yesterday or today, and it's not going to end. We have a long fight ahead of ourselves. People like to say that Seattle is, some kind of progressive bastion. As incidents like tonight, or like what's happening at the library tonight, show it's really not. At least not in its laws and its policies, not in how the city behaves. Its people might be, in a lot of ways. But clearly there's a disconnect there. Clearly we've got some work to do. Tonight is just one example of that. The purpose of the commission, much like the Women's Commission earlier, is to advise the city, the council, the mayor on how their policies, how bills, all of that affects the LGBTQ community, our community. One of the things I've learned in the past 2 months since getting involved in the commission, though, is how little coordination there is between the city and the commission, and the city and our community. I'm making it my mission to fix that, to make sure that we're actually building communication channels between our community and our city council members and our mayor and our city departments through the LGBTQ Commission. But I can't do that on my own. So I'm really just up here asking you all for help. I can share my stories with the city. I can give them my perspectives, but I'm just a white trans girl up here. I don't represent all of you. I don't know what all of you are facing. And usually it's way more powerful if you all can tell your stories. So rather than just speaking for all of us, I'd really like to bring some of you into the room, let you share your own stories, amplify your own voices, and help the city understand how, what they might think of as really simple policies or really obvious policies protecting freedom of speech, how that actually hurts us, and how those supposedly inclusive policies are actually weaponized against us. So, thank you.
Thank you, Annabelle. The Women's Liberation Front claims to be here to provide a feminist, I'll use air quotes multiple times, a feminist critique of gender identity. Gender identity, which is protected under Washington state law. Our next speaker is from an actual feminist organization, Radical Women. The Radical Women, a socialist, feminist, grassroots activist organization that provides a radical voice within the feminist movement. Here to speak on behalf of them, Emma Allen.
Thank you so much. Really great to see people out here tonight to stand up to bigotry. And I do want to say, as a cisgender socialist feminist, I know that the transphobic Women's Liberation Front certainly does not speak for me, and they do not speak for so many feminists. So the organization with the Radical Women is a socialist feminist organization that believes feminism is for everyone. And because I feel so strongly about this, I even wrote a document that we've been passing around, Unpacking Transphobia, to counter their analysis with a dose of socialist feminist analysis. The term bigotry has creeped into the movement for women's rights. And transphobia and other forms of discrimination only serve to alienate feminists from our natural allies in the fight for liberation. It is important to be aware and speak out against these toxic prejudices which only serve to damage feminism. At the heart of the attacks on trans people is the notion of biological determinism in holding that biology is destiny. This comes from an extreme radical feminist or separatist notion that biology is fixed. This justifies a rigid view of oppression based on gender. But this also excludes other oppressions such as race and class. As social feminists, we recognize multiple oppressions, and we understand that the oppression of, say, a rich white woman is not going to be the same as the oppression of a working class woman of color. Women should not have to just resist, of course, one kind of oppression. We face many struggles. Through this bigotry, the transphobe undermine feminism and actually are setting women's rights back. Trans people have been the strongest leaders for gender equality. They have sought to expand gender expression, which builds women's empowerment and means that we do not have to hold to strict gender roles. Because of their bigotry, the Women's Liberation Front have sunk to the really vile blow of allying themselves with far-right patriarchal organizations. These include the Heritage Foundation and Focus on the Family. These far-right groups seek to reinforce traditional women's roles and advance a transphobic and homophobic agenda. They also go after reproductive rights and biological autonomy. By working with the far right, the trans-exclusive radical feminists are causing more damage to the feminist movement. And they play right into the right wing's hands of divide and conquer. They also seek to undermine feminist civil rights legislation, such as the Equality Act, which would make sexual orientation and gender identity protected classes. But to them, it threatens them as biological females. But they are the ones who endanger trans women and their access to facilities such as bathrooms and domestic violence shelters. And the other safety issue is access to housing and jobs. Trans people are among the most discriminated groups, are higher than average discriminated against in seeking jobs. We know that the real danger is the profit system that hurts all working and poor people and takes rights away from the trans community. We must stand with trans people and not allow feminism to be poisoned. I'm thinking there are more of us than them, but I also hope there are those that, I'm still hoping that there are those that we can educate and win over before they get sucked into the transphobe agenda. Thanks.
So before we keep on going, I want to remind people that we have snacks over here. Yay! And those gummies are pretty freaking awesome. If you haven't had them, please do so. They're still there, that is. Next we have Sasha Sommer, a representative from Seattle City Council member Shama Sawant's office. Shama Sawant has been a long-time supporter of Gender Justice League and the trans community, and we are so happy to have her office here to speak.
Hi everyone. As she said, I'm Sasha Silver, community organizer in Councilmember Sawant's office and a member of Socialist Alternative. Councilmember Sawant's office is happy to be the council sponsor of this event and to stand in solidarity with the trans and LGBTQ community. Socialist Alternative stands in solidarity with you also. Councilmember Sawant isn't able to attend tonight and sends her apologies, and I really appreciate the opportunity to share a few words on her behalf. The struggle of our trans community members is a sharp edge of the fight for basic rights in workplaces and in society at large, and also one of the leading examples of courage and determined political activism. As a socialist feminist, I proudly marched in every trans pride march in our city since its inception, and I am in full solidarity with all trans and LGBTQ community members. The Women's Liberation Front as an organization and this event at the Seattle Public Library, under the guise of feminism, put forward the dangerous and false idea that the rights of trans people are counterposed to women's rights and that trans people represent a threat to the safety of women. This is the same type of vilification and fear-mongering that is used against people of color, people facing homelessness, and other marginalized groups, and is similarly used to persecute or deny them basic rights. And the facts clearly dispute their claims. All over the world, the trans community is under attack. Between 2008 and 2014, there was 1,612 murders across 62 countries of transgender persons, equivalent to a killing every 2 days. This is no different in the U.S. The transgender murder rate hit a historic high in the U.S. in 2015 when at least 21 trans women being killed simply for expressing who they are. The majority of these were trans women of color. The true number is almost certainly higher. Trans people are 4 times more likely to live in poverty. 90% of trans people report experiencing harassment, mistreatment, or discrimination on the job. Trans people of color were 6 times more likely to experience physical violence from the police compared to white cisgender survivors and victims. And all across the country, the trans community has been continually scapegoated with discriminatory legislation. But in the face of these conditions, the discrimination and oppression, the reality is that the movement for trans rights is making amazing strides forward. Successes in the fight for gender-neutral bathrooms in schools, workplaces, and public spaces is just one brilliant example. Women and trans people and the LGBTQ community more broadly, communities of color, face many of the same attacks, from disproportionate rates of poverty to the lack of access to medical care, reproductive care, or trans-inclusive medical care, and disproportionate rates of violence. Fighting for women's rights, in contrast to what the Women's Liberation Front puts forward, is in fact inextricably linked to not only fighting for trans rights, for the LGBTQ community, and against racism and all forms of oppression and exploitation. Because the different forms of oppression are endemic to the global capitalist system, capitalism needs to maintain oppression in order to perpetuate the brutal exploitation necessary to amass untold wealth for a few. We need a mass movement of working people that can unite across gender and gender identification, race, nationality, and sexual orientation, movements that can fight against oppression and for decent standards of living for all. That is also the lesson of the inspiring history of LGBTQ activism, that we need working people to build united movements. I urge everyone here today to join our exciting Tax Amazon 2020 campaign so we can fight for a tax on the largest corporations to fund an expansion of publicly owned, affordable, social housing for working people and a Green New Deal. And I want to thank the Gender Justice League, Jerry Chen, and everyone else who has been, who organized this event to make it clear that Seattle does not stand with the ideas put forward by the Women's Liberation Front.
Thank you, Shama Salon's office. I'd like to take a moment to talk a little bit about money. Unfortunately, events like this do not come free. And at the Gender Justice League, we fight every single day, and we utilize every single dollar that people give us in order to fight for transgender rights. If you can do so, I would highly encourage you to donate $10, $5, or $1, whatever you have, and please do so. If you want to do so at genderjusticeleague.org/donate. Our website is ready for donations, and it's mobile accessible, so it should be pretty easy for all of you to take out your cell phones and... Sorry? Yes, we will post it on the Facebook also. On the Facebook. Our next speaker, Jamie III, unfortunately is unable to come tonight. So I will read a prepared statement from them. And so a little bit about Jamie III. They are a local Black trans queer, amazing poet and educator. He is the author of the book, If I Should Die Under the Knife, Tell My Kidney I Was the Fiercest Poet Around, as well as, and then I got fired, One Trans Queer, Reflections on Grief, Unemployment, and Inappropriate Jokes About That. These are Jay Mason III's words, and he is an amazing poet and amazing speaker, so unfortunately, you won't get the same effects, but please bear with me. Fuck all frameworks of freedom of speech that allow for false equivalencies rooted in protecting white cis bodies over all else. Today, in the Seattle-Tacoma area, there are 2 protests happening to demand the rights of trans people. This one here today, and a group of activists demanding the release of undocumented trans women from the detention center in Tacoma. Threats on trans lives are real every day. As an author and editor, libraries are supposed to be sanctuaries of knowledge and truth. They are places of refuge for the houseless and for the sober, for the young, the elders, and for the vulnerable at many levels. They cannot be places where we allow lies to be told about the most targeted. They cannot be places where we allow violent rhetoric to be held as and coddled as though it has equal weight to words of the most marginalized. Today, we demand, not ask, for the Seattle Central Library to recognize anti-trans rhetoric as hate speech, and that has no place in our public sanctuary of truth. Fuck her and those that... Not mine, I swear. Fuck her and those that support them and their work against justice. Wolf and Megan Murphy have no place in Seattle. Thank you very much, Jamie. We miss you. You were here. Hope I did his amazing voice justice. And finally, as our last speaker for tonight, we have Jerry Che. Fighting for the rights of transgender people and the rights of women are not mutually exclusive, as the Women's Liberation Front tries to argue. It is an old and tired argument, not to mention fear-mongering, that giving rights to marginalized groups will endanger women and children. His argument has been used against Black people, immigrants, gay people, and now transgender people. This is not freedom of speech. This is a case of hate speech. Jerry, our final speaker of the night, is the person who started all of this. The first person to stand up against this hate speech. We would not be here without all the work that they did to put this event on. Jerry.
Is ISIS here? Not that group. So yeah, what an amazing crowd. You are all awesome. Thank you all for coming out. So my little talk is going to be a little spicy. I'm not representing any groups, so you can get away with it. So just like a quick content warning, I'm just going to talk about violence a little bit, and I won't get graphic. So yeah, I'm Jerry Che. I am a them. I'm non-binary and trans. So I really have no business or no background in organizing something like this. But as soon as the event was announced at the library, I didn't see anyone else stepping up to organize. So a couple days after, I just put it together. I said, what the heck, why not me? I just hopped on my computer, blasted social media, wrote government and press and the library, got public records requests, started contacting organizations. Yeah, by the time it got enough attention, a lot of organizations stepped up. Gender Justice League has been awesome and specifically organized this room and this speaker panel. So yeah, I strongly recommend if anyone sees injustice and you don't see anyone stepping up for yourself, even small things. So like, I came here today a little early. I saw there were no gender neutral restrooms on this floor. There's gender segregated restrooms here, so I just got some printouts, take them over the Three times is a good lifestyle. I recommend it. So yeah, let's see here. So thanks to Thea for giving a land acknowledgement. I want to go a little deeper into that and give a colonization acknowledgement here. So I believe, and I think it's a little self-evident, that all oppression is connected. And it's important to recognize that, I think. So we're here in a European colony, Seattle colony, and the European settlers, not that long ago, 150 years ago, started taking this land from the Duwamish, and from 150 years ago to 1904, 94 longhouses were burned down, 17 Duwamish villages were destroyed, even though the Duwamish ancestors have been here literally for over 10,000 years. And yeah, that's 1904, it's not that long ago. The Seattle Library was founded in 1891, so it's very possible that a chief librarian went to one of our apartment buildings that are still here, and his neighbors went and burned down some long houses and put, and I don't want to get graphic, but you know what happened. Some of the settlers have last names you'll recognize: Denny, Terry, Gessler, Bell, Warren, a lot of others that you'll recognize, who either took the land or actually committed the genocide themselves. We also have Columbia honored everywhere here: Columbia City, Columbia River, Columbia Tower, all those named after Christopher Columbus, who on his very first trip, very first contact with indigenous people in the Americas, he did a lot of things. So I don't want to get graphic, but a lot of murder and other kinds of assault. That first trip, he found any of the indigenous people who didn't follow his European Christian strict gender roles and tortured and murdered all of them. So that's the reason I bring this up, this colonization legacy. These anti-trans speakers here today follow that legacy of propagating hate, violence, and trans non-binary people, non-binary people. And yeah, they are following the legacies of Christopher Columbus, Denny, Terry, and others who just doesn't follow their European gender binary and those ideologies. So yeah, we're here fighting for non-binary human rights and trans human rights and dignity, and fighting against that terrible colonial legacy. We're saying that it's not welcome on this land, and our city government has to make changes to not allow this to happen in the future. We have given the library administration a list of very reasonable changes they need to make in order to stop hate in the future in our libraries. We've also contacted the mayor and city council many times to speak out against hate and for trans rights, specifically about this event. Heard public statements from none of them, with the exception of Sean Swan's office here today, which is terrible. In Toronto, so earlier Tony mentioned that these groups have set up booked library events in other cities: Toronto, Vancouver, and New York City. In Vancouver, that was the first major library, Vancouver, BC. That was in early 2019. The library board there made the same decision as our Seattle Library Board and allowed it to happen. They made no significant changes after that event, and now they booked a room at Vancouver Public Library again. That's taking place in March. They just announced that they will not cancel that one either. So it's very clear, if the library and city don't make significant changes, these groups will be back. So yeah, we have to keep pushing. This isn't the end. We need to push the library and the city to keep making changes. In Toronto, city council and mayor all came out against these groups, against everything they stood for, and supported trans people, unlike here. And they passed a resolution for the library to change their policies. In New York City, they have very, very similar policies as Seattle. There was uproar against the groups having anti-trans hate there, and New York City Library canceled it up. No meetings, no board meetings, or anything on, they just canceled it, which the board could have done here. So yeah, the stakes here are very high, and yeah, I thank you all again for coming here. Now let's show these hate mongers in the city that's hosting these hate mongers that will no longer accept this hatred in our public places, and to protect the dignity and safety of trans people. Thank you very much. Thank you.
My name is Elaine Wiley, co-executive director, co-founder of Gender Justice League. Make sure you pronounce our mission at Gender Justice League since 2012. Gender Justice Commission is to empower all people to eliminate discrimination and prejudice based on sex, gender identity, and gender expression and sexual orientation in Washington State, and to ensure that trans and gender diverse people can live their lives safely, true to themselves, and free from discrimination. I just wanted to thank Jerry. Thank you so much for taking a stand.
to take a bold stand and rise up and say, you know what, we need to do this together. And then to also be honest and be like, I don't know how to put together a giant event for 300 people. Thank you for asking us. I feel like it is part and parcel of our mission to fulfill on those needs. When there is a need in the community, we're here to stand with that. And I really appreciate that. So thank you. My job now, and I know that Oliver and Sarah are also on the list, so if y'all got stuff to say, you do that, and then I've got my piece. So, you want to say?
Hi folks, so we're getting ready to give you the logistics before we get everything gathered up and march out. When we rented this room tonight, my name is on the rental lease. So, if you could please help me by gathering up all of your trash and making sure it gets at least laid in the center of the table if you're at a table, or deposited in a trash receptacle on your way out, I would greatly appreciate it. Other than that, please take hot beverages, water bottles, food with you for the march. We got easily transported portable food for a reason. We thought ahead a little bit. So please rate our snacks. It's less that I have to take back in the lift with me. So if you could do that, that would be great. Fill up on coffee and tea. Wait, just a minute. I used to be a teacher, so I didn't say go. Hold on. But before you leave, definitely stick some extra snacks in your pocket and get a hot beverage because it's cold outside and you're going to be outside for a little while. And with that, I think Oliver is ready for a security briefing. So you'll definitely want to listen close to what Oliver has to say and what Elaine has to say as we move out of here as quickly and as safely as we can, okay? Okay. Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much for everyone who came out today. As Sarah said, my name is Oliver. I am a board member with Gender Justice League, and I also will be running security tonight. So, when we go out, please look for anyone in an orange vest. That will be myself, my second in command, and your medic team tonight. We will have 2 medics. They have general first aid, any trauma support that we need right on the spot, but we also will have SPD near us. So if it does go above our medic needs, we will be getting you to someone as quickly as possible. So please, if you see someone in an orange vest near someone, please give us as much space as possible to do our jobs. Also, we will be leading you down the stairs or the escalators, depending on accessibility needs today, or elevators. And we will be going down to 4th Avenue and straight across. We are taking the flattest route possible, and that's where our protest will be going. We could be encountering all sorts of things today. Please be watching your security team. We are trying to keep everyone as safe as possible today. We will be backing people up if necessary, trying to make sure that we aren't encountering any issues. I do have another set of security team with us. We actually have a few. They also are in yellow vests. So please be listening to your vested security teams. We also will encounter SPD, as I mentioned. Their job is to keep the streets safe today, to make sure that we aren't getting ran over by cars, stopping traffic for us as we will be going down 4th Avenue. There are some places that we're trying to stay off of today. So again, listen to your security team. We're going to do our best to listen to them and try and stay off of these areas, but also make ourselves heard. We're here for a reason, to make sure that we are heard and get our voices heard, and we're going to make that as possible as much as possible, but as safe as possible. I'm also the accessibility coordinator for Gender Justice League, so we have accessibility needs, we have safety needs that also need to be, we need to be aware of during this protest. So if you have any questions at any point, talk to someone on my team, whether they be in orange or yellow. Grab us, talk to us. If you have any worries during this protest, during this march, please talk to us. We are here for you, to keep you safe, to keep the general public safe, so please come talk to us if you have any issues during this. Okay?
All right. Thank you, Sarah and Oliver.